Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I don't know where you are. I'm Nicolas, game designer at Machinations. Here with me it's Bogdan and Floria, he's QA support.
Hello, everybody.
And well, thanks for tuning in. So in today's session, we're going to talk about LiveOps and how you can use Machinations to improve your process, to enhance your process, mainly focused on content creation and game design. First of all, we're going to have an overview of what LiveOps is, just the process overall, and how we are going to use Machinations in LiveOps. Then we are going to use Candy Crush as a case study, as an example. I think many of you here know about Candy Crush, but we are going just to explain a little what it's about and what's the main scope for Candy Crush in this webinar. Then we are going to show how to add live events to your diagram. So we already have a diagram for Candy Crush, but we are going to show how to add events. And we are going also to run scenarios, to run predictions with different scenarios and different personas. And we're going to look a little at some best practices along the entire presentation. So I hope this helps you also. And last but not least, there will be a Q&A session, but please feel free to ask any questions here in the chat. And I'll be interrupting every now and then so that you can ask anything that you want. But I'm going to ask you first also to introduce yourselves. Just in the chat button, and just send a message to everyone and tell us where you are and where you are located, what studio you are, or maybe you are independent. It's fine, it's the same. And why you are interested in this session, what do you want to get out of this, and okay, so I hope this helps you. And let's start. So let's do an overview of LiveOps. Right now, many companies use LiveOps. Of course, there's no golden rule or there's no defined process because everyone does a different workflow depending on what they want to achieve. But let's assume that we have a game, we have Candy Crush, and we have already launched it. So maybe we already have analytics, so we get data from our players, we analyze them, we organize them in segments, and then we define patterns. We define, okay, this segment behaves in this way, this other segment behaves in another way, and we find some issues. For example, some segments are churning for some reason. So once we analyze this data and find a problem, we find a pattern, something that we want to solve, then we start to plan a roadmap. So what changes are we going to apply? What do we need to do? Do we need to add content? Do we need to tweak something which can be faster? Is it a fix? Is it a bug just in the app? So once you plan this roadmap, then you are going to create or update your content. And this is a main point that we are going to look at today. So maybe you're going to add new levels, maybe you're going to add new characters, new items or events. And once you have a design of this content, then maybe you're going to implement them. So this is part of the programmers. You have a design document perhaps, or any way of communicating with your programmers and say, hey, this is what I want to change. So they implement, then there are appropriate testing. Of course, this is not linear. And of course, this is not realistic. Maybe after testing, you might go back to updating content. Sometimes you don't even plan. Sometimes you need to make a change as fast as possible. So you just implement, test, and that's it. And then you launch these changes. And after you launch, maybe, and this is very important, you are going to monitor, to analyze, to get more data and engage with your community and get feedback to know how are players reacting to this change that we did. Do they like it? Is there an impact? And then the circle starts again. So the idea is, once you get this data, you analyze again, and then you might make another change. And this is like the philosophy of LiveOps. But as I said before, our main focus today is just on the content section. And creating content might be in different manners. You can do it in different ways. For example, you can add events. You can maybe add a game mode. For example, you have just a PvE mode, and maybe you add an arena mode, a PvP, and just capture a flag, anything in those terms. Maybe you add in-app purchases. new levels. For example, Candy Crush, I don't know if it has 10,000 levels or even more. Maybe they will add more levels and more content, a season pass, for example, or limited offers, and so on. So there are different ways of adding more content once the game is live. So why do we need Machinations? The thing is, maybe we can just add a change, just implement, test, and launch it, and that's it. But the problem is you don't know how that will impact your player base. You don't know if that will help you especially with those segments that you are aiming at. So the idea here is you create a model, a control model of your game, and then you say, okay, let's do a control test of these changes, and we'll see how this impacts the game and these players, and let's see if, for example, we can reduce the churn rate. So assuming that you already analyze data and you design content and you're saying, okay, we are going to add a new event. Now let's start working on our Machinations diagram. So first you're going to do a design of this diagram, then you're going to start the balance process. And once you say, okay, these are the results that I wanted, then you're going to implement this update, or you're going to talk with the programmers and say, hey, this is stable, I want this, so let's release. About designing a model, and I think that this is a good practice for every model that you do in Machinations. It's good before you create this diagram, it's to think about what the goals are, what your KPIs are. In our case, we're going to look into that, but in our case, it's going to be our churn rate. But it depends on what you want to measure. Also, it's good if you can define segments before, if you know which are the segments that you want to focus on. Then the scope. So maybe you have a huge game and sometimes it's not good. It's not a good practice to model the entire thing because things can have different granularities. So you should define a correct limited scope. And then you will define your assumptions because sometimes you don't have enough data. Sometimes you don't know anything about your players or you don't know how they will behave on this. So you will have to add these assumptions. And once you have this sort of pre-design, then you're going to start the balance process. And the balance process, this is also how the workflow should be for any other diagram in Machinations. So you start building or add changes to your model. Once you add these changes, then you're going to run predictions. So you just build a model, you hit predict, and then you get results and you analyze them and say, okay, is this what I wanted? And if it's not, then you're going to start again this building or this changing of your model. So this process is iterative. Of course, it's not linear. It can be, sometimes you might just build a model and then you say, okay, this is what I wanted, that's it. And once you have a stable design, then you're going to implement your update. So this is a good practice. Of course, sometimes it's not applicable in reality. Maybe you want to release as soon as possible. But the idea for us is to avoid any issues once the game is live. To have a good practice and say, hey, let's do this before, let's plan, let's try to detect or mitigate any risks once the game has been launched. So now going to Candy Crush. So I think many of us know about what Candy Crush is, but let's look a little at the core loop. So you know that you just play levels and the reward that you get is you progress. So you just are level 1, then you go to level 2 and so on. So sometimes you might earn some rewards, which are, for example, gold bars, and maybe the color fish and many other boosters. And it might be at some point that maybe you make a purchase and then you play levels again. Of course, this can be a little more complex than what it is because the game is just linear. But what if you can earn rewards now by playing events? So maybe you participate in an event, you get more rewards. So this is what we need, especially to balance, because we don't know the effects of events in our gameplay, and especially in every segment that we want to analyze. So before showing the diagram, let's do this pre-analysis or pre-design. So our goal is to control our churn rate. This is what I designed. It's not, it's arbitrary. We can talk about any other goal, but today we're going to look at how to control that. And this is also a very important thing. We always have to define a step. So we need to know what a step of simulation is, which is the time increase in your execution. So in my case, one step is one level attempt. So every time I hit play, a player attempts a level. They might win or lose. And of course, every level can take 2 minutes, 1 minute. It depends, it can be variable. To simplify this, I wanted to set that one step is 2 minutes. So every level, every attempt will take 2 minutes on average, of course. Then the runtime in this case is just going to be 200 steps, which is about 7 hours. It's between 6 and 7, of course. Also, we are going to assume that we have data, we analyze it, we have done a thorough statistical analysis, and we know that churn and purchase behavior depends on idle time and the win-lose rate. So this is what we have modeled in the diagram. And also there are a lot of assumptions, but some assumptions that are important is that one simulation represents one player. So whenever we hit play, this is just the journey of one player with the game and how they evolve. And also, players never stop playing in this case. It's like they never sleep. They just keep going and going, and they never stop until they run out of lives, or they say, "Hey, I'm done. I don't want to play this anymore." So let's move to the diagram. And please, are there any questions before I start showing the diagram, or I can? To model the base game, yeah, I don't think you have to model the entire thing. Sometimes it's good to define a scope. I'm going to show it now. And players use boosters, of course. So you get boosters, and then you can just use them whenever you want. Some of them in Candy Crush, some of them are timed. So you get a booster for a certain limited amount of time, or maybe just for one level. And some of them, you get them, and then you just can use them whenever you want, strategically. So that's the idea. Sometimes it's a resource management game in some way. So you can think about it strategically. So this is a basic diagram of Candy Crush. Players just play a match. They might win or lose at certain points. And this chance of them winning or losing, it comes from a spreadsheet which I'll show later. And it has for every level the win chance. Remember that in Candy Crush, some levels are hard or some are nightmarish levels, something like this. So the harder the level, the lower the win chance for them. So whenever a player wins, they will get to a new level, but whenever they lose, they will lose a life. So let's show lives. So as I said, you always start with 5 lives. If you lose a level in an attempt, you will lose a life. If you run out of lives, you have to wait until they are refilled. There are several ways of getting lives in Candy Crush, but right now let's focus on you just get them after 30 minutes. And remember here that one step is 2 minutes, so you will get a life again after 15 steps. So a way for you to reduce or to increase your win chance is by using boosters. And boosters like striped candies or wrapped candies, they are used to decrease these the chance of like difficulty or your losing chance. So whenever you use a booster, you can just, it's more likely that you will win, but it's not going to ensure that you will win, of course. Generally, you start with boosters, you start with boosters, but sometimes you can purchase them. So players can also purchase boosters and lives with gold bars. Gold bars are the hard currency in Candy Crush. You can purchase them there's a shop. Sometimes you have limited offers. And the idea is that sometimes you can get these gold bars with events, but we're going to look into that later. And here I have, of course, these are many assumptions that I've done, but I wanted to model that players have different behaviors in terms of lives and boosters. Generally, because I've also seen this in forums, people don't buy lives. It's not likely, but they might. So I try to create a model in which they say at certain points they want to buy boosters, but it depends. So if players have high idle time, or maybe their win-lose rate is not that good, maybe they've lost a lot, then we might lose them. So I've also added in this diagram a retention section. The retention means that there will be times or there will be points in the simulation that they will decide to leave. They might leave, and at a certain point they will say, okay, I've churned. I don't want to play this game anymore. So now the user will not be active. And this is going to be the most important element or the most important component that we are going to look at. So sometimes if you want to analyze player retention, it's good for you to use registers with conditions to model this behavior. And also, for example, this player at this point, at a certain point, they might leave, but we don't know yet. So they are still active. So this is entire base diagram. Of course, this doesn't have, for example, the game itself, like doing matches and everything that's related to the game to one level. But this is what I meant before with the assumptions, sometimes, and the scope. Sometimes you have to define a limited scope, and you can say, hey, this is the only thing I'm going to focus right now. Because my purpose is to know when they're going to churn, not just the game itself. So another thing that's important, and now going to LiveOps, is to use custom variables. Custom variables, I like to group them into two. There are some, like, for example, max lives that are your game parameters, your game design parameters. Maybe you have them like in a config file, or you have it somewhere like in a spreadsheet. I'd rather leave these here, especially if they are like separate variables, because then you can use them, you can play with them and run different scenarios. So for example, here, I know that players will have up to 5 lives, but maybe you want to run a simulation. Even, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a season pass. I haven't covered season passes here, but there's a season pass that you can have up to 8 lives. So maybe you want to play with that scenario too. So it's a good practice if you have custom variables with your parameters. But also I have other variables that are Google Sheets or spreadsheets. So you can create different types of variables. There are some that are embedded in Machinations, but some others are read from external sources like JSON or Google Sheets. So in Google Sheets, I have one spreadsheet that has, first of all, the data from our segments, and also the chance of winning each level. So I hope you can see this. Great. So this is a very simple table. It just has, for every level, the chance for a player to win that. The first 5 levels generally are like tutorial, and it's very impossible to lose them, but you might. But here it will not happen. We are going to assume that players will maximize their earnings, let's say, their progress. And this has up to level
Sorry,
9.
Nick. I
Yeah.
just wanted to interrupt you. Actually, Mike is asking if you are defining the assumed churn motives and conditions.
To answer that, let's go to segment behavior. So of course, this is assuming, let's say, we had a huge amount of data and we analyzed it and we found statistical patterns. And we said, I know that, for example, these players, if their win-lose rate, so for example, we're trying to find patterns here. That's the idea of analyzing data. It's the players that had this win-lose rate, they churned with a higher chance. So maybe their win-lose rate might have a higher impact, and also idle time. But maybe there are other causes. We just focus on these ones. Some causes we cannot model them, like they left because they wanted, and of course that can be a good thing about that you can add in Machinations. Not everything is static here, and that's the power of Machinations. You can just use random functions. And this is, for example, these variables. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but the idea is here I designed like there's a sort of range or interval of probabilities in which players might decide to buy a live, because I want to cover people that maybe they will do at some point. So I don't want to make this static and say, oh, all of them are going to buy live, or all of them are going to churn at this point. No, I want to say there might be a certain randomness. because it would be a bad thing if you say, I think players are going to behave in this way and they're going to do this like this. I wouldn't do that. Even though if you have data, I would just add some randomness, or at least maybe you have an confidence interval, and you know that you can create a random variable in those in that range. So yes, of course, this is just what I've been playing around, but it would be really good if you really have a lot of data, analyze it and say, let's see if the win-loss rate affects them, or maybe there's a limited offer. I thought about this also. What if they purchased something and after they made 2 purchases, they see that they don't progress that much and then they churn? That might be another thing because maybe they are frustrated. I wanted to look at what might frustrate them. So I think in this model, it's maybe they have been waiting a lot and they are tired, or maybe they haven't won that much. Or maybe they've lost a lot, so they say, okay, I want to leave. I don't care about this anymore. So let's go back to the diagram. So I'm going to show another one that's very important, and I will change it now, but it's a segment. So here, and this is also good practice, it's if you want to run different scenarios and run different segments or personas, depending on what you have defined, I want to change this variable. Right now, I'm going to simulate segment 1. So I'm going to simulate how this segment behaves and the likelihood of them of churning. So maybe I can change this to 2, and then I'm going to run segment 2 and so on. This is one way. Of course, some people don't like doing this, and some people like to say, I don't want to choose a segment. I want just give me randomness. And then I want to see what happens with different groups. So you can create your own segments in Machinations. You can just say, okay, I know there will be, everyone will buy between 20 and 80% chance. And then you will define your segments there. That can be another thing. But I wanted to make this more organized and say, we already have some segments and let's focus on each one. So what I'm doing here is analyze segment 1. And let's start the simulation again. I'm going to do this faster now because I want to focus on the chart. So in the chart, and this is what I meant before with the balancing process. So let's say we have a model, we run predictions, we simulate, and then we analyze. So in this chart, what we are seeing plotted is different KPIs. What I've chosen here is, for example, how they progress, if they have gold bars, if they made any purchase, and if they are still active. So apparently these players are still active, but the thing is we are just simulating one player, and I want to simulate hundreds of players, like thousands maybe. So for that, you need predictions. And what I'm going to do is just hit predict. And now I'm simulating 100 players at the same time, 100 players from segment 1. And this is also a good practice. It would be really good for you to say, okay, I'm simulating 100 players. Let's see from all of them, what's on average their level progression, if they churned or not. So simulations are still running. Let me see. I think there are some questions. Oh, okay. Another thing that's very important is to always rename. And I'm saying this, but I sometimes I don't do it. But I think it would be good if you do it, to rename your predictions. Just here you can. I'm going to call this segment 1, and this is with no events. And let's see. See here, for example. So with the charts, you can always hover, and you can stop on a certain step, and you can analyze the KPIs at that point. So on average, I see that segment 1 reaches level 100. You can also, I can show this, but I don't think you will like it. But you can show all of the runs. But the thing is, it's a lot of information. It's showing the progress of every player, of every simulation that you run at the same time. I'd rather stick with the statistical indicators, like mean here. So I'm going to hide this. And here we can see, we can use these advanced statistics, and we can see that from 100 players, 28 are still there. And so there has been a 70% churn rate. This means that it is bad for them. Many of them have churned. So the idea now is, how can we solve this? So let's add an event. And I'm going to show now the episode race. So for all of those, I can run simulation now. So for all of those who don't know this, in Candy Crush, episodes are grouped into 15 levels. So every time that you are in a new episode, there are 15 levels, and if you end first, then you can get 25 gold bars. Otherwise, you can get boosters. You will always win. You are competing against 4 other players that started the episode at the same time as you, and the idea is, the faster you end it, the higher the chance of you to get the gold bars. So now I want to see if this affects our churn rate. Another good practice also is, if you have some things that you want to enable and disable at the same time, you can use custom variables. So here, for example, in this register, let me show you. So I have several conditions. You can write conditions here. I can zoom in just if you don't see it. You can have conditions in like grouped in AND, if you know about programming or Python or any other language. So for example, I know that I will give rewards if I have my episode active. And this can be another good practice also. You can, if you have parts of your model that you want to disable at a certain point, you can just add a variable or parameter. Now it's 0, so now it's not active, but I will set it to 1. So let me hide this. Let me reset. And the episode race. And I'll save. So now let's run our predictions. Another thing that's important here is that now we're going to compare 2 charts. So I have one chart that's for segment 1 with no events, and now let's run one with the episode race event, and let's see if this affects them. The idea is, with events, we try to create a positive feedback loop, but a controlled loop, because we want to give them boosters or the chance for them to win, to progress, but not that much, because maybe we also want them to make a purchase. So the idea for us is, let's give them something. Let's keep them hooked so that they don't leave. And so Candy Crush does this with many events. Let's see what happens with this is segment 1, episode race. So we can see here that there are 34 players that remained active with the episode race. So here we can compare 2 charts. The upper one is without the event, and the one at the bottom is the one with the episode race. So regarding the churn rate, we see that about 28 players remained after the game, the simulation finished. But with the event, 33 remained. So it's higher, but not that good. So I think we should add more things. We can add more. There are many problems with this event. So the thing is, when you start the episode, maybe in the middle you had problems and you had a problem with your game, or maybe you had a bad streak and you lost many levels and other players won. So you will never get gold bars. So it's like, it's not helping you. And also, something that's also good practice, it would be good if you customize events. This means sometimes it's good if you add events that are specific for certain users. So for example, we see that one segment, it's more likely to make a purchase, but a cheap purchase, for example. So at that point, maybe it would be good to set a limited offer for them. Or some other players will not make a purchase, but you want to keep them because maybe they will convert at some point. So in that case, it will be good to set customized events. So what I'm going to add here is the candy necklace. So let's look at the event. So the candy necklace event, for if you don't know how this works, it's a way of controlling your win streak. So the higher your win streak, the higher the chance, the higher your rewards. So if you win a level, you will get, for example, here a striped candy and a color bomb. If you win 2 in a row, then you will get more rewards and so on. So what I have here is, for example, I just add an increased win chance. So if you win 1 level, if you win 2, I'm going to increase that win chance. But also, I will give rewards every 5 levels. So every 5 levels, I will say I will give them like permanent rewards. So as I said before, I've also disabled this event, and I'm going to enable it. And I'm going to run predictions. I think I would like to compare it to the episode race one. So whenever you hit predict, Machinations will ask you to, hey, which one do you want to replace? So I'm going to replace chart A because I want to see if there was a progress between the episode race and now we have both events. Okay. I'm going to show you now what's another way of doing this, but the idea is, what if these results are not the best? So then we are going to start this balancing process. We have an event and we realize that maybe we're giving a lot of gold, or we should give more gold bars, for example, in the episode race. So maybe you can change that. Then you can run more predictions and you can look at the charts and say, these are the results that I wanted. So I'm going to maximize this. And we can see here that generate has decreased way better. So for example, with the episode race, let's rename this segment 1 with events, with all of the events. So we can see at the end that just with the episode race, there was a 70% churn rate. But with events, with all of the events, now there is a 50% churn rate. So this might seem that this is helping them. So the idea of balancing Machinations is, let's look at what KPI are we focused on. So I wanted to focus on user active. Now, let's run predictions. Let's add some events. Let's add some features. Let's see if that affects them. So here we can see that this helped them, and maybe we can add more. Maybe we can do something else. We can, for example, right now, I know that I reward them with 25 gold bars. Maybe I should give them 50 for some reason. I don't know if it's a good thing.
Hey, Nick, let me just stop you there. We have another question in the chat.
Yeah.
How do we know if players are quitting because the game got boring?
Oh, yeah, of course. That's the thing about, so I'm looking at the entire question. Yes, I'm tracking win streaks here. So first of all, I have win-lose rate here. So I can show you the connections, but the idea is I have my wins and losses, and I'm reading my wins and losses, and then I calculate my win-lose rate. And depending on that, I'm multiplying by a certain, let me zoom in. First of all, maybe I'm speed running this, but I'm going to share this diagram. We're going to share this diagram after the session so that you can look at it better, or you can even make a copy for yourself. But yes, I'm measuring my win-lose rate. You don't need to plot that in the chart. As long as you have that in your diagram, and then you ask questions or you make a condition. For example, here I'm just multiplying this by a value that I have here. So I have, this is the weight of the win-lose rate in their churn probability. How do we have, how can you get that? That depends on your data entirely. So you should have data, you should know this is my rate. So I know that these players, they all churned, and they're in common, all of them had a high win-lose rate. Or low. I mean, they might have won less than they lost. So at that point, then maybe there's a high weight for them. So maybe also giving too much boosters might be boring. So maybe you can add something else here, that if they haven't lost that much, maybe you can create you can analyze the entire streak, the historic streak. And maybe you can do something like, hey, let's see what happens if they never lose. Maybe they start losing, they lose interest, and they might churn also. So that can be also interesting. Maybe you can add something. So for example, I'm going to do this very quickly. Maybe you can do this like streak and something like this. And I'm going to add a state connection here, and you can say something like, if this streak, it's I don't know, for example, 100, because levels are too easy, then the probability to churn is going to be higher. So maybe you can create a formula here that has a sort of relation between the churn rate and your streak. So I want to move quickly because we're about to run out of time. I hope I could answer your question, and so another thing that I wanted to do is, we can change our segment. We can do something like, hey, let's change to segment 2 and let's run predictions again. But there's a new feature that we're about to release. Now it's in, let's say, alpha, which is a dashboard. It's a way of having different scenarios and comparing them at the same time. And instead of going to the custom variable, changing, and then running predictions and all of that, you can just play with influencers. Influencers can be different variables in your model. In this case, I played with the custom variables, but you can also use pools. You can use resistors. You can use different influencers. You always have to define a range. And here what I've done is, for segment 1, what happens without events and with events. So for example, here I have segment 3. So the one on the left, it's with no events, and the one on the right, it's with events. And we can see, for example, with no events, it's the one in purple. On average, they reached up to 160 steps. So they all churned for some reason. I don't know what happened with this segment. But the thing is, once I added events, some of them reached the end of the simulation. They might have churned, but some of them have remained there. So the thing is, the problem here also, it's sometimes we know what the answer is. We know that it's the churn, like the win-lose rate and your idle time. But maybe sometimes you have more complex variables. So I think, and going back to what Anna, what you said, maybe it would be good if you already know what things could affect players on their journey, and keep all of these variables in a diagram, because then you want to balance and see how this might affect one player or one segment and another segment. So for example, if we now compare segment 4 with no events and segment 4 with events, we can see that they not all of them churn, but it helps them progress farther. And the thing is also that if you give them gold bars, for example, if you have live events, then maybe they will never make a purchase. So that can be another bad thing, because of course you have to control the balance of the game, but also you don't want the revenue to decrease entirely. You want to control that. So there's a right balance of how many rewards you're willing to offer players. So we're about to run out of time. So let's start with the Q&A session. I don't know if you have any questions.
There is a question in the Q&A section. I just wanted to wait for the ending of the webinar because it wasn't really related to something specific. The question is about if there is a limit to how many runs can happen in the diagram. As in his example, in Tim's example, they could be looking at thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of units doing things. Can Machinations replicate that level of chaos?
How many runs? You mean how many players? How many simulations? I think you mean.
What I understand from this is that they want to see if maybe a lot of predictions can be used, like the chaos. Is it replicable in Machinations?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think I've run once up to 1,000 predictions. I haven't run many more. But also the thing with this diagram is that it doesn't have too much chaos. Well, it has chaos, but maybe for more chaos, you can add more randomness. You can add more the random int or random functions and just add them in different places so you can cover that chaos. But the thing is, yes, I don't know actually technically if there's a limit, but some people I think they played with 2,000 or 3,000 predictions at the same time, if I'm not wrong. So
there is another question in the Q&A section. How do you set up influencers?
So let me share this again. I don't know why I stopped sharing. So influencers, this feature is not out there yet, but when it's going to be out, if we don't have this, let's say influencers are here, you can just define, for example, a custom variable. We can call it, let's say, for example, going to what Anna said about players may be bored. So we can have a boring threshold, for example, and we can like a limit. If the streak is 80, then if they have won 80 levels in a row, then they might churn. So then you just add it, and then of course you have to add it somewhere in your diagram. So the idea is, for example, you have a condition here, and you can say if my streak is above or equal to my boring threshold, then I will churn. So you can do something like this, and if this is true, just churn and just activate that. This is helpful in conditions. I generally don't use them, but it's useful if you want to know, for example, how many of those 100 players churned. So I know that 20 were active. This means that 70 churned. No, sorry, 80. my math is horrible. So yes, before I if we're waiting for more questions, I don't want to forget anything. I have a list here, so I don't want to forget anything. First of all, I wanted to ask, well, I want to say first that we're going to share the diagram later. The recording, I think I can share it here in the chat. But it's public, you can all look at it, but we can share it afterwards also. The recording will be uploaded in our YouTube channel. And there's also going to be, we're going to publish a document about live monitoring, which our other game designer, Harry Ashton, has written and has published. So we're going to share that with you too. And also we are interested to know if you are interested in any other topic for our next webinar, like for example, if you want us to look at balancing merge games, if you want to look at Web3 models or games about tokenomics, or maybe something that's not gaming related, maybe on another industry perhaps, or also to focus on data ingestion and how to create integration with Google Sheets and how you can use arrays. Or maybe you can also look at the balancer And also we can do a webinar once we have the dashboard, so you can play with that too. So it would be really good if you are interested in any other topic. You can write to us by email or on Discord channel, and we are open. We're open to any. So if there are not any more questions, I hope this has been really helpful, and at least I could give you ideas of how to use Machinations with LiveOps, and how you can use Machinations to leverage your process, and how to think also. I think our purpose here is to help you think about building a model, what you have to think before building a model, what's the purpose, and also how to analyze that data. Of course, there's a lot of more stuff that you can get from charts, or more behavior that you can add, or more data that you can ingest. And this is a simplified version just for a webinar. But I think the purpose is to have a more complex diagram with a lot of behavior and a lot of conditions, and just to play around, balance, and say, okay, I added this event, I added this new feature, and I know now I don't have any risks. I know that it will help my pair base. So if there are no more questions, thanks everyone for tuning in, and see you on the next webinar. Thanks Bogdan for being here also, and Marina, and see you on our next webinar.